Hello, this is Justin Williams with the Wolfpacker Podcast. I'm joined today, as always, with editor of the Wolfpacker.com and fellow co-host Matt Carter. Ethan McDowell is in the weeds doing his research on the ECU Pirates, cranking out some great game week content while we record this podcast. So we miss Ethan for this podcast, but we will have him back on the next one. I'm sure he'll tune in and give us his feedback down the road on maybe some things we missed. I'm sure he'll post that on whatever we missed on the message board. Always a fountain of information, that Ethan McDowell. And while we're talking about Ethan McDowell, go ahead and follow him on Twitter. I'll plug his Twitter account right off the bat, at Ethan M. McDowell on Twitter. Follow the main account at the Wolfpacker on Twitter. You can follow me personally at Justin H. Will. Some quick reminders for the listeners and viewers at home before we get into Week 1 Game Week podcast previewing NC State's matchup against the East Carolina Pirates this Saturday. Before we do so, please remember that you can subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, everywhere you listen to podcasts. Plus, you can always watch us on our YouTube channel. If you do that, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, give this video a thumbs up, and drop a comment while you're at it. And also, head over to thewolfpacker.com. Take advantage of a special deal. For just $1, you can get a year's worth of premium subscription to thewolfpacker.com, part of the On3 network. Takes you through the next year. So you sign up today, you're gonna be set all the way until Week 1 of the 2023 season. So great time to take advantage of the deal because, really the bulk of the athletic calendar is starting right now. So 2022, 2023 athletic schedule, for just $1, you'll be completely set for the entire football season, basketball season, and really going into, the bulk of the recruiting season going into next year's class. So a great time to take advantage of that special deal. Plus, it's football season, so why wouldn't, if you're not already a part of the Wolfpacker.com, now's the time to really jump in, since we're getting into football season here, which is what we're going to talk about, Matt. Saturday, 12 noon. I've seen on Twitter that the East Carolina parking lots are going to be opening up at 7 a.m.
Saturday or Friday?
Saturday,
Okay.
although I think the drinking has probably already started in Greenville. In fact, I'm not sure if it ever stops, but I'm sure that there are some Pirates fans already tailgating for this Saturday's matchup. And it has a very classic feel to the NC State ECU rivalry. Of course, NC State coming into this game as the favorite, with plenty of preseason hype. NC State preseason ranked number 13, picked to finish second in the ACC Atlantic, although also has the second most votes to win the ACC conference as a whole. So that means voters are pretty confident that the winner of that NC State-Clemson matchup, whoever goes on to win the Atlantic, is the favorite to win the ACC. So big game for NC State jumping into Week 1 with all those expectations. But as anybody that has grown up around North Carolina football, college football in the South knows, ECU licks its chops every time it gets an opportunity to play NC State, particularly in Dowdy-Ficklin Stadium in Greenville. This is the game circled on ECU's schedule. It's going to be Week 1. They're coming off a year that, ECU earned bowl eligibility, wasn't able to play in that game, kind of like NC State. And now NC State had a better record and was supposed to go to a better bowl than ECU, was supposed to play in the Holiday Bowl against UCLA. Of course, that game was canceled last minute due to COVID problems within the Bruins program. It's been a major talking point over the offseason for NC State, but, something that maybe NC State fans don't think about much. ECU has kind of that same motivation going into this game, saying we had a good season last year, we had a bounce back season last year, and we never had our opportunity to play in a bowl game. So, they're going to be coming into this game with a bit of a chip on their shoulder as well. So from your perspective, Matt, just going into this game, storylines, did I hit the nail on the head in terms of, yes, NC State's the favorite, but again, they're going to be stepping into a hostile environment against a team that, should have been in a bowl game last year, had an opportunity to win 7 games. So I don't see this as an easy out. I don't see this as a soft warm up game for the Wolfpack. They're going to be going into week 1 running.
Yeah, I agree with some of that. Yeah, East Carolina was an interesting team last year. They did go 7-5, but then you look at who they beat and who they lost to. Pretty much a case of chalk. They were the ultimate chalk team last year. There were 3 really good teams in their conference that all went. 2 of them went 8-0. One went 5-3, and that was Central Florida. And they lost to all 3 of those teams, right? And then you look at some of the teams they beat. Temple went 1-7 in the AAC. South Florida went 1-7 in the AAC. Tulane went 1-7 in the AAC. Navy went 3-5. Memphis went 3-5. So 5 of their 7 wins came against teams that were the bottom 5 teams in the AAC. They also beat Charleston Southern from the FCS level. They did have a nice win at Marshall. But the weird thing, too, is they were also very competitive in some of those losses. So maybe they didn't win them, but only lost by 3 to South Carolina. Put up a good fight at Central Florida. Lost in overtime at Houston, who was ranked at the end of the year. Cincinnati handled them, but, last I saw Cincinnati, they won the college football playoff, so no shame about that. So that's kind of how they were weird. On one hand, they were chalk. Didn't really beat a whole lot of substance last year. But when they had opportunities, they acquitted themselves, for the most part, pretty well. They do have a lot coming back, too. I think they're probably, on paper, if you had like the AAC, you had the best, and then you had the best of the rest. I think ECU probably being considered in that group of the best of the rest. You would hope that there's a nice gap between the ACC and AAC, the American Athletic Conference, that, if NC State is among the best of the ACC, that should be sizably better than being the best of the rest of the AAC. But this is East Carolina Super Bowl, and I'm not trying to say that I know some people resent that saying, right? Carolina fans will kind of dismissively say, "Oh, NC State treat us like they're with their Super Bowl." It's a nice thing to say. This is, I believe, this is going to be treated somewhat like a Super Bowl for East Carolina. It isn't their home crowd. NC State has not had a lot of success at that stadium. I expect ECU to pull out all the stops early in that game to try to get off to a very fast start. They're going to be fired up. They're going to have an extra bounce in their step, an extra little punch in their hitch. And so I think the key, NC State got to clearly withstand that, take that punch. And eventually you're hoping that the talent will show if everything on paper translates like it's supposed to. But this is a nice opener in terms of challenge. And, personally, I would probably prefer this if I were coach as a week 2 instead of week 1. And give me an FCS team in week 1 and then this in week 2. But it is a very nice, solid early season test and the type of game you want to see on the schedule.
Well, I'm sure as the coaches have talked about in their availability, both on the ECU side and the NC State side, opening the season with a game like this, it isn't exactly, the Chick-fil-A kickoff game. It's not like NC State's going down to Atlanta to play, a top caliber SEC opponent, but it is an in-state rivalry. It is a game that the fan base cares about. Obviously ECU looks at NC State maybe a little bit differently than NC State looks at ECU, but nonetheless, I think it's fair to say that both fan bases, there's bragging rights involved in this matchup, and it's a game that you start off on the road. I want to get to the on paper, football dynamics of this game, but before we do that, one element of this game that I'm kind of interested in exploring with you, Matt, is starting off on the road in a hostile environment. And we think about this NC State team as a very veteran team, a team that's been around the block. I mean, you just look up and down this depth chart. I mean, just look at the two deep. There's really not many weaknesses on this NC State roster, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. But when you think about that experience, you also have to consider when these players have had that experience. And all these experienced veteran players on this roster have all been on the roster when COVID was happening. So you go back to 2020. A lot of those games are played in front of limited crowds, only conference games. It was a very weird season. And then 2021, things got back to normal, at least, at NC State. But you look at NC State's schedule in 2021, really, I was talking with you before we started recording this podcast, Matt. The only game I think NC State, could say it had to face a hostile environment in last season was that road game at Mississippi State, which of course was an early season loss for the Wolfpack, to a team that at the end of the year, NC State, on paper was the better team. So my question for you, Matt, is, how much of a factor do you think the crowd is going to play in this week one matchup? Because yes, it's a veteran team, but it's not exactly a team that has a ton of experience playing in front of a hostile crowd.
But to go further, I mean, there's a lot of talk, and justifiably so, at NC State about going undefeated last year at home, which I think was 7-0 maybe. But the road record was, I believe, 2-3. They lost at Miami. They lost at Wake Forest. Well, Wake Forest was a pretty good crowd. But it's a smaller stadium than ECU, and there's a fair amount of red in that stadium.
And probably a much tamer crowd than ECU.
It is a different culture, to say the least, between Wake Forest and East Carolina. They did beat Florida State on the road, but I was at that game. That was not necessarily a packed house that afternoon. There was not a whole lot of expectations on the Tallahassee side of things for that game. Boston College, maybe that was unique because BC did sell out. They hadn't had a primetime game in forever, and they got one at BC, and it was a pretty good sellout. But NC State kind of took the crowd out of that game early. But yeah, I think ECU probably most compares to Mississippi State, which, by the way, was of the 3 losses, the 1 loss of which NC State was fairly uncompetitive. Yeah, and I think they lost 24-10, but that was with a late touchdown thrown in there for NC State. So
didn't look like themselves in that game too.
And that was an early season game, which kind of adds to the similarity of this is an early season game. So you hope that they grow from that they can take that experience. I do think that this NC State team has a lot of motivating factors. One of which is Ruffin McNeil, former East Carolina coach, now at NC State. Wherever Ruffin goes, he becomes quickly beloved. So I only know the man through media availabilities, but it comes across why people love the man so much. I think in a lot of ways he's kind of a heart and soul of that NC State behind them in the Murphy Center, behind the scenes. This will be his first time back on the football field. He went back to ECU to be inducted into the school's Hall of Fame. But this is the first time he's back on the football field. And, I think this is an NC State team that's older. They would love to win this one for Ruffin. They would love to prove something. Obviously, been a long time since they played a football game because of UCLA. I think there's still some bitterness about how that came about. So it's going to be interesting how they handle that. And actually, it's a very key component to the game. I agree with you because I think, I expect ECU to come out blazing, guns firing. And if they're missing their target and NC State dodges and makes them miss and makes them make some mistakes and quickly gets up 10-0 or 14-0, and then that kind of mitigates the crowd, right? And then all of a sudden that adrenaline wears off, and it comes just about man on man, which we'll talk about here shortly, where NC State probably has some advantages. Um, but if it's ECU that comes out and scores the first 2 touchdowns and quickly gets up 14-3 or something like that, now all of a sudden you're looking at a 4-quarter ball game potentially. So, and that pushed the crowd much more in play.
Something that Dave Doran brought up earlier this week in his game week availability, just on this tough crowd that NC State expects to play in front of on Saturday afternoon. It's going to be a nice dress rehearsal for NC State too, getting ready for that big Week 5 matchup against Clemson. Of course, after NC State plays at ECU, they're going to come back home for 3 games, Charleston Southern, Texas Tech, and then UConn, before eventually going down to Death Valley to play Clemson in the biggest game of the year for the Wolfpack and for Clemson, down in Death Valley. So, again, a team that hasn't had a lot of experience playing in front of hostile crowds on the road. I think it's kind of the perfect Week 1 matchup for NC State, just to, we talk a lot about measuring stick games. Like last year, NC State's the first time we kind of had a measuring stick game last year was Mississippi State. Well, you're going to get a measuring stick game to me in Week 1 right now, because to me it would show a lot if NC State goes to Greenville and wins by 20 points or more. I mean, to me that's making a statement in Week 1. If NC State simply wins this game and survives, I'm not necessarily taking off points for that. But when you look at these rosters side by side and you look at the talent levels that NC State has compared to an ECU, you would expect NC State to hopefully win this game by double digits. That would, I think, be a positive outcome for the Wolfpack. But let's talk about on the field matchups, Matt. And candidly, I'm not a fountain of information when it comes to the East Carolina football roster. I know a lot more about NC State's roster than I know about ECU's, and I think I speak for a lot of people listening to this podcast. But luckily, we have you on this podcast who just completed the ECU game week preview for the Wolfpacker.com. Another great reason why you should sign up for that 1-year deal. Take advantage of the $1 for just a year, or just $1 for a year of premium subscription at the Wolfpacker.com. But Matt, where do you see NC State's advantages in this game, and where do you see, maybe some potential vulnerabilities based on the strengths that ECU brings to the table?
Well, I'll say this: we cannot. East Carolina has a group of good skill talent, and they got a solid offensive line that's big. They got potential to be a good offense this year, especially for that quote-unquote mid-major group of 5, whatever you want to call it. They have potential to be pretty good. Everybody talked around NC State about Holton Ahlers, quarterback. Believe it or not, there was a time where Holton Ahlers was the number 1 quarterback target on NC State board, and he committed to ECU. And the reason why is because his father is the PA announcer at East Carolina. He grew up in Greenville. His mother used to work in the East Carolina recruiting office at one point. And eventually he just decided he couldn't turn down the hometown family tradition. And so then NC State pivoted to Plan B. Do you remember who Plan B was?
I do not.
Devin Leary. So... And here we are, all these years later, and they meet again. Ahlers is, he got the obvious comparison to Tim Tebow in high school because he's big lefty, very physical, very strong, downhill runner, very athletic. Because he's coming back for a super senior year, he's going to have all the East Carolina records. He's going to have a lot of conference records. Got some capable receivers. Tight end Ryan Jones started his career at Oklahoma. C.J. Johnson was another Greenville kid that decided he wanted to play with Holton Ahlers, who could have gone to UNC if he legitimately wanted to. But I think the guy to watch for is the running back, Keaton Mitchell. He's a legitimate premier running back in the AAC, ran for over 1,000 yards last year. home run threat. I think he had 5 touchdown runs of 50 yards or more last season. So, he's the type of guy where you could shut him down for the first 7 Ks, and then boom, he'll get a 60-yard touchdown run on you. And so he's a threat every time he touches the football. And that's one of the things that in a game like this, big plays can keep East Carolina in it, right? And he is a big play running back. So I think, number one, you have to stop the run if you're NC State. If you look at East Carolina's 5 losses last year, they averaged less than 100 yards rushing per game. If you look at their 7 wins, they averaged over 200 yards rushing per game. So stop the run. You're going to hold ECU much more in check. Conversely, I think there is an opportunity for NC State's offense to move the football on East Carolina, provided they protect it. ECU was number 25 in the country last year in forcing turnovers. Gave up a lot of yards otherwise. It's a smaller defensive line. They lost their All-American caliber corner to the NFL. He nearly made the Denver Broncos roster as an undrafted free agent. So I think there's potential there for NC State to score if they just protect the football and defensively kind of contain that run game. Don't let the big play pop on you. You do that, protect the football on offense, contain the running game. Over 4 quarters, the matchup should, and the talent difference, I think, should eventually swing it towards NC State's favor. We're going to talk about the line here shortly. That's kind of probably where I would pinpoint the difference to be between the two teams on paper. But like I said, you got to keep no big plays, no turnovers, and the rest should take care of itself.
Something else Dave Doran mentioned in his Monday availability, talked about the last time his team went to Greenville and lost at ECU. Matt, maybe you can help me refresh what year that was. Was that his first season?
No, 2016.
2016. Okay, so it's been, nobody on this team was on that team. You've got a completely different roster. But what he mentioned about that game was how many penalties NC State committed in that game, which led to the eventual result. And if I'm thinking back, if we're making comparisons to last year's game at Mississippi State, if I'm remembering correctly, Matt, I think NC State committed a lot of penalties in that game at Mississippi State, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't know for sure, but I think you're right. What we're telling about that 2016 game is East Carolina proceeded to go 1-9 the rest of the year after beating NC State. So that was not a good NC State East Carolina team that NC State lost to, and yeah, it was self-inflicted. It was the early season game. ECU pulled out all the stops. It was the first year of Scotty Montgomery as head coach. They had played Western Carolina in week 1, so they kind of held back a little bit. And NC State had to play a game of adjustment, and they kept constantly getting costly penalties. I think the quarterback for ECU completed like a ridiculous amount of passes in a row at one point. So that was that's a good. NC State last 2 times in Greenville. 2010 with Russell Wilson, Nate Irvin, all those guys on the team that was a Saturday in Maryland away from playing for the ACC title, lost in Greenville in the middle of the season in overtime.
Yep.
That 2016 team was supposed to be the breakout team. Yeah, that was the team with Bradley Chubb and Ryan Finley's first year as a starting quarterback. And then they would go on after that. They win the next 3 games. They beat Wake Forest handedly at home, beat Notre Dame in the Hurricane game, then lost to Clemson on the overtime missed field goal in the regulation game. Kind of went downhill from there. But, that was supposed to be NC State's breakthrough team that went to ECU and lost to an East Carolina team that beat only one other FBS team that season. So you cannot take things for granted at ECU. There are a lot of reasons why NC State will be motivated to play this game. But so will ECU. Cannot disregard, because Last two times NC State had played ECU, I think the combined score is like 980-5 or something like that. So uh,
Hmm.
I'm obviously exaggerating, but
It's one of those games that if this game was at Carter Finley Stadium, I wouldn't have a lot of worry about it. I think the fact that it's on the road and you gotta get on the bus, you gotta travel an hour and a half east, you gotta stay in a hotel the night before, and then you gotta go play in front of a bunch of fans that are going to be yelling nasty things at you. It's going to be loud. There might be some when they're trying to make the play calls. Leary's trying to hear what the play calls are. There might be some breakdowns and miscommunication. Watch for some early false starts, stuff like that. So I'm with you, Matt. I think NC State plays its game, it'll be okay, but that's not a guarantee when you go to Greenville. Crazy things can happen. So let's talk about the spread, the Vegas spread, and the over under, just to kind of see what you're thinking about this. I'll tell you what I'm thinking about it. Right now, the consensus seems to be NC State as an 11.5 point favorite. If my memory is serving me correct here, I believe that opened closer to 10 points. In fact, I think I might have seen it at one point at 9.5, if I'm remembering correctly. But Matt seems to think that it may have started at 10. Either way, that spread has gone up. And NC State has been the overwhelming favorite pick. It looks like most of the betting public is on NC State on this game for the 11.5 point spread. Over under is set at 51.5. Matt, is there out of those two spreads, the over under, is there one that you're not a gambling man, but if you were, is there one that kind of makes your eyes pop out a little bit more? Is it maybe there's an edge to either side on that spread or the over under?
well, I've already put a score on the message board. We do the ACC Pick'em contest every week. I've been doing that since 2004. Hard to believe. So started at Rival, now it's on three doing it. And I've already put a score on there, and I will say this. I didn't know what the over-under was. The number of points I had in the game, adding it up, was 51. So,
Mm,
uh,
right. Yeah.
that's pretty.
Maybe Vegas is going off your prediction.
I'm
Maybe
I'm sure there's some people in Vegas that had paid $1 for 12 months because they're smart people over there, and they know where to
right.
get their NC State information to make the smart bets. So let me ask you, what are the Sharks? Do you know where the Sharks are putting their money on in this game? I pop.
Well, I mean, typically the sharp money tends to fade the public. So as the spread has gone up to 11.5, I'm sure you might see some last minute sharp money on the Pirates. 11.5 is a pretty big spread. I mean, it really, to me, it really depends on how NC State comes out in this game.
Yeah.
Because if NC State comes out hot, I don't think they have any problem covering that 11.5 point spread. But if this is a close game at halftime, it's not going to shock me at all to see this turn into a 4-quarter game. And an 11.5 point spread suggests that it's not a 4-quarter game. So I
Yeah,
don't know.
I probably going over on that. I'd probably give the points and take NC State as right now. I think it's it's a game, as I said. If it's as you mentioned, if it's in Carter Finley Stadium, you probably feel really confident. Honestly, even though it's in Greenville, if it was week 3 or week 5 or later in the year, you still feel fairly more confident about NC State chances. I think the dynamic of being the opener, knowing that ECU's had months to kind of put wrinkles together for this game and pull out all the stops, that it is in Greenville, that's where the hesitation comes from. It's really kind of and the fact that it is a good ECU team. I don't want to downplay that. This is a good East Carolina football team. I expect them to be back in a bowl. The key for them is to kind of break through in one of those upper echelon games and turn those close top AAC losses to close wins. But I probably give the points based on my pick online. I would give the points and take NC State and the spread, but we'll see. I would say this is a great opportunity too. By the way, I wanted to mention that earlier. It's on ESPN. Game day leads right into this game, so this is a good opportunity because this is where you're gonna get a good amount of viewers. I don't know what ESPN was thinking when they put this on ESPN and UNC and Appalachian State on another channel. Um, they will obviously have the entire state of North Carolina viewing, from the mountains to the triangle to the eastern part of the state, viewing their one of their networks at 12 o'clock, but you figure they wouldn't have had them competing against each other. But this is a great opportunity for both programs to have kind of a bit of a national spotlight. Uh, I mean that's a nice time slot to have game day leading into your kickoff. So
Yeah, huge opportunity for the Wolfpack. I
you're
mean,
gonna go straight from Lee Corso putting on either the what is it, Ohio State and Notre Dame. So I don't know what the
it has to be. Oh,
yeah
well, he's gonna be putting on a Buckeye head.
yeah Buckeye hat or the leprechaun hat, one or the other. You're gonna go straight from that to welcome to Rowdy Dowdy Ficklen Stadium.
Yep.
That's a nice setup.
Well, and a lot of eyeballs on this game. NC State's got big shoes to fill coming into this season. Should be a nice opportunity for them to, show that they belong towards the top of the rankings early on in this season. Uh, the first time I saw this spread, I immediately my edge went to NC State just because I thought, we're getting a little bit cute with the spread. NC State is better than this team at least by 2 touchdowns. The only reason the spread is what it is because it's on the road. But, the closer you get to Saturday, the more you start second guessing yourself, the more you start reliving the memories of NC State football and the nightmares of going to Greenville, and not as confident as I was, say, you asked me this on Monday in the 11.5, but I still, if I had to pick a side, and I'm not going to, I just want to watch this game and enjoy it and not have to worry about, is NC State going to win by 14, nonetheless, just win the game in general. I'm probably not taking any action on this game, but I think I would go NC State with the points minus 11.5 and over under. I mean, the over under seems kind of low, especially when you think about two quality quarterbacks. You talked about ECU's playmaking ability. NC State, I think Vegas might be a little bit down on NC State's offense compared to where it was at the end of last season, just with the loss of the running backs, Ricky Person and Bam Knight, and of course the absence of Emeka Emezi. But, as people that closely follow NC State know that there are, great replacement candidates waiting in the wings to take over those roles. In the receiver department, I don't think NC State's going to have any issues replacing Emezi in terms of his production. I think that's going to be dispersed pretty widely throughout, an array of different catching options, whether it be Thayer Thomas and Devin Carter or some of the young guys like a Keon Lassane or a Julian Gray or an Anthony Smith. I mean, there are plenty of playmakers where Devin Leary can find his guy. It's just, to me, the question early on in the season is going to be who's Leary's security blanket going to be. I think it's going to be Thayer Thomas, but we're just going to have to wait and see. Emezi was certainly his security blanket the past couple seasons. That was by far his favorite target. So we're going to see who his favorite target becomes this year. But, I think both of these offenses are capable. Now, this is the first time you're seeing a fully healthy NC State defense in almost a year. So it wouldn't shock me if NC State's defense really flexed its muscle and stymied the ECU offense in a game that, maybe NC State doesn't win in dominating fashion, but it ends up being a lopsided score at the end because ECU's offense just can't get things going against this healthy defense. But again, I still just the way college football works, the length of these games, the fact that you have two capable quality quarterbacks in a rivalry game. It's not like ECU is going to go away if they fall behind early and vice versa. I think 51 I think I would be taking the over there.
Yeah, I do though. I think the NC State defense is where I would hesitate about that. Because, this is when you look at East Carolina's losses: 13 to Cincinnati, 19 to Appalachian State, 17 to South Carolina, 16 to Central Florida, uh, 24 through overtime at Houston. Even in a win against South Florida, they scored 29. They needed overtime to get to 30 on Memphis. So I think
Eh,
NC State's better than those defenses. The one thing that I do keep coming back to, kind of close my thoughts about this, these two teams met 3 years ago. The difference was 34-6. The game before that, the difference was 58-3. East Carolina has come a long way since then. I get that. But that 2019 NC State team was not a very good football team. The injuries killed it, but it still went 4-8 that year. This NC State team has come a long way since 2019 too. And can we realistically expect East Carolina to make up a 4 touchdown difference just 3 short years later, when NC State's significantly better than that team, even though ECU itself is significantly better than that team? And how much the home game season opener maybe close that gap a little bit? But that's why I start thinking 4 touchdowns. That's, even if ECU is just 2 touchdowns, closes that gap by 2 touchdowns, that still covers the spread, right? And
yep.
that's what I kind of keep coming back to. And I think that's also my cautionary tale for nervous NC State fans. Just 3 years ago, they dominated ECU. This is a far different ECU team. I get it, but it's a far different NC State team, too. And I think Mike Houston knows that, because Mike Houston keeps bringing it up every time I've heard him this week. I think he's trying to guard the expectations a little bit of it. Yes, we're better. We went to a bowl last year. We've turned the page here at ECU, but this isn't, the 2019 NC State either. He mentioned that every time. This is not, we're in a much better place, but you know what? So is NC State. So it's almost like he's kind of foreshadowing something.
Last thing I would say, how I want to wrap this podcast up. Big weekend for the ACC in general. Week one, you're in the non-conference slate. Now's the time where the early season narrative starts to build on the ACC as a whole. NC State's going to play an important part of that. Obviously, NC State predicted to be one of the better teams in the ACC, has a road test early on against East Carolina, a formidable opponent. UNC, as we mentioned, is going to Boone to play Appalachian State. We've got West Virginia going to Pittsburgh and in a rivalry game that I don't think has been played in quite some time. Thursday night, that's a big non-conference matchup for the ACC, and Florida State LSU on Sunday. How do you think, Matt? How do you think the ACC is going to fare in Week 1?
A great question. They need it. Boy, do they need it. This is a huge year for the ACC, right? Yeah. That's a quick question. I'll say this. I was pretty impressed with Florida State. I know they beat up on Duquesne, however you pronounce it, Duquesne, whatever. But they look very clean, very efficient, very well-oiled machine, smooth operations. That's one I would say watch for. Watch for Florida State against LSU. I think they may sneak up and surprise Brian Kelly in year one at LSU. And one I'm most nervous about, Pitt and West Virginia, is a little nerve-wracking just because Pitt has a mixed history when it comes to non-conference games. Both teams have new quarterbacks, but I'm probably a little bit more nervous from an ACC standpoint. Let me throw that out there very quickly about UNC at Appalachian State, because I think App is favored by a point or two.
No, there was at one point I think App it went down to a pick 'em. UNC had been the favorite, when the line opened, and of course I think the reaction to UNC's Week 0 game against Florida A&M, of course Florida A&M with a handful of guys academically ineligible in that game. That was an 11-point game late in the third quarter against the team that UNC, I think going into that game, the spread going into that game, once all the academically ineligible players were announced, I think it was like 44, 45-point spread, something like that.
Yep.
Now, of course, UNC ended up winning that game, I think, by about 30 points or so. Some fourth quarter pat statting there, if you will. But, if I'm UNC, I don't think I'm that confident based on how week 0 went. Of course, there are some mind tricks involved in that. Just getting ready for an opponent that's going to have players missing. It might have messed with the mentals and their preparation going into that game. I think you're going to see a more inspired UNC team in Boone on Saturday for sure. But I think every college football expert would circle that game as a true coin flip, 50-50 type game.
And here's the problem for the ACC. UNC kind of considered, best of the rest in the Coastal, right? Everybody kind of puts Miami, Pitt, battle for the Coastal. UNC is supposed to be the best of the rest, talented enough to supposedly be a sneaky contender to win the Coastal. And you're talking about them being a pick'em against a team from the Sun Belt Conference. That doesn't happen in the SEC. Probably doesn't happen in the Big Ten, although I would argue maybe it should. That's the problem the ACC has right now. You can't have a team that supposedly one of your top half teams, going to one of the better teams in the Sun Belt and being considered a pick'em. That's at the bare minimum a problem in perception. Where that's where the ACC would really benefit from NC State and UNC being authoritative Saturday on the road against some respectable to pretty good group of 5 teams, and then hope that Pitt and Florida State win their respective games. So I wouldn't be. I
forgot to mention Boston College and Rutgers too. ACC, Big Ten.
Yeah.
You're playing the worst of the Big Ten. You really need Boston College to win that game.
I wouldn't be shocked if the ACC comes out perfect.
Wow. Now that would be. Are you predicting that, or you're saying you wouldn't be shocked?
I have to go back and look at my ACC pick'em.
Okay.
But I think I might have predicted that, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah, that the LSU Florida State game concerns me just because that game is being played in the Superdome down in New Orleans, practically a home game for LSU. We'll see how legitimate of a threat Florida State's going to be this year, because that LSU roster is still plenty talented, and Brian Kelly, as bad as his fake Southern accent can be, he's still a pretty darn good football coach. So we'll see, but it's just great to have football back. I'm sure everybody's excited. I know I'm excited. Everybody's going to be tuned in Saturday, noon Eastern, ESPN, Dowdy Ficklin Stadium. If you're not making the trip down to Greenville, I'm sure you'll be watching on TV. Matt Carter, any parting shots before we wrap this podcast off?
I think we're good. Let's get it going.
Okay. Well, last reminders, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on Apple, Spotify, Google Play. We're also on YouTube. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel, give this video a thumbs up, and drop a comment while you're at it. You can follow us on social media at the Wolfpacker on Twitter. You can follow me personally at Justin H. Will. And hey, give Ethan McDowell a follow at Ethan M. McDowell on Twitter. Also, you can give us a like on Facebook, NC State Wolfpack on the Wolfpacker.com. And lastly, take advantage of that special deal. For just $1, you get a year's worth of premium subscription to the Wolfpacker.com as part of the On3 network. All the latest and greatest in NC State news, buzz, insider information. You get access to the message boards. And like we said earlier on in the podcast, it takes you through the next year. So it'll take you all the way till week 1 of the 2023 football season. It takes you all through this current athletic season, which we are about to enter. And football is back. It's so good to say that. I can't wait. And we will be back for a recap of NC State ECU, hopefully talking about NC State 1-0 moving on to Charleston Southern in week 2. So for Matt Carter, this is Justin Williams, and this has been the Wolfpacker Podcast.